Hi everybody, my name is Rebecca Hollister and I'm running for Leavenworth City Commission, and today I'm going to do my deep dive of the 2024 Annual Police Department Report. As a reminder, this report was presented on the May 27th City Commission meeting, so if you're interested in hearing Police Chief Pat Kitchen's remarks, you can go watch that video. Let's go ahead and get started. The report begins with a message from the chief that yes, crime did increase in Leavenworth in 2024. However, there were no homicides, and the crimes that increased were mostly Part 2 crimes, which tend to encompass more of the non-violent offenses. Next, the chief talked about police department officer longevity. He was happy that the portion in blue on the left-hand side, which is the portion of officers that have only been here for 2 years or fewer, has decreased, meaning that officers are tending to stay longer, which makes them more skilled and experienced. However, throughout the presentation, the chief did say that they still have some staffing problems with police officers. I believe there are about 5 to 6 openings pretty consistently. Johnson County tends to take a lot of these officers because they can pay more because they're just a bigger city. This chart shows how many dollars of the city budget are spent on the police department as it relates to the entire city budget. In 2024, about $10 million was spent on police needs, while the budget overall was about $71 million. In the past years, it has always hovered around like 13 to 15% of our overall budget going toward the police, and 2024 it was about in that 14% range, so pretty standard. The number of calls for police service has actually decreased a little bit, but what has increased is the proportion of calls for service that end up with a report attached to them. For example, in 2022, roughly 17% of calls for service resulted in a report, while in 2024, 37% of those calls resulted in a report. Here's that breakdown of Part 1 and Part 2 crimes. As you can see, Part 2 crimes have been the ones that have increased quite a bit. This is a national classification system used, and Part 1 crimes are generally more serious than Part 2 crimes. If you do the math, the overall crime did go up by about 30% between 2023 and 2024. You can also see here that there were 59 more domestic cases in 2024 than 2023. This, I think, is one of the most interesting parts of the report. So you can see that there were 80 suicide calls, and the mental health co-responder, who's not in a uniform or anything, was with the police department over half the time. This can really help de-escalate the situation, and she also provides important follow-up work for these individuals, as well as other individuals who are having mental health crises but may not be suicidal. For me, running for city commission, I think this is something that would be a huge benefit to public safety in our community, and if there were ever room in the budget, which of course is difficult sometimes, I would absolutely love to support the police department in adding a second person for this position. So this is the 10-year trend for criminal activity on persons. So as you can see, it definitely appears 2023 may have been an outlier. 2024, while a sharp increase from 2023, still sort of fits with the overall 10-year trend of a very, very slight decline in crime on persons. This is the same chart but for property. So as you can see, there was really a downward trend and now it appears to be creeping up again. However, that was also, the downward trend started during COVID, which people just weren't out and about as much during then, so that could be a reason why it went down so sharply during that time. It'll be really interesting to see how it increases or decreases in future years. Here's another visual of those Part 1 crimes, and I will say that roughly half of all Part 1 crimes are cleared. Cleared means that they found the perpetrator, they've taken action on it, and they've closed the case. That, the roughly 50% being cleared, it was actually a little bit less this year, but it's about been the same for the last 10 years. Here's the same thing for those Part 2 crimes. I will say the clearance rate here is actually about 80%, and that's been pretty consistent over the past few years as well. Drug-related crime is always a huge topic of conversation. By the way, I'm not really sure what's going on with the 0 cases in 2024. I think that might be an error in the chart. I would just focus on the fact that the 104 suspects were charged. Meth continues to be the highest count for drug offenses. However, the police chief did express severe concerns about fentanyl and how that's sort of affecting the community going forward. Citations, which could be any ticket, not just traffic tickets, have continued to decrease, which is good. Traffic accidents have stayed roughly the same. This chart looks at traffic citations by race and gender. I also compared this to what we know about the breakdown of Leavenworth by race overall for population, and it about checks out. 70% of Leavenworth individuals are white, estimated to be at least, and they received about 70% of the traffic tickets. These are the department's investigations. In 2024, there were actually no investigations that originated from outside the police department, and overall that has continued to decrease, which is in general a good thing so long as it's reflective of a population that feels comfortable reporting if they feel bias from the police department. Use of force is obviously a continued topic of conversation. Any time that a weapon is displayed or involved in any way, which you can see on the very right-hand side, it goes to the police chief directly to review, and they also review body cam footage. The police mentioned that last year there was one lethal encounter, and that was reviewed by the city attorney and the KBI, and that officer was cleared. The last thing discussed here was animal control, a lot of adoptions, which is wonderful. There appears to be not really a discernible pattern here. Of course, a decrease in the COVID times, and then an increase once again. So not a whole lot that we can determine from this data. Animal ordinance violations have also decreased, so that's a positive. At the end, the police chief also shared that in 2025, he has started collecting data on homelessness-related calls. There have been about 65 calls for service related to a homeless person, usually some sort of a disturbance. However, he said that more than half of those have come from the same individual, and he'll have a lot more data to share on that in 2025, which I definitely think is a good thing because we need to pay attention to public safety as it relates to all citizens, which include also the unhoused. At the time of the city commission meeting, there was, of course, discussion about fireworks, which, by the way, happy 4th of July. I personally would support putting that back on the ballot for another vote, but of course, they're still illegal in the city of Leavenworth. That is it for my first deep dive. I hope it was informative. Thank you for joining me. Please let me know if you have any questions in the comments. My issues page should be on my website in the next few days, and I'll have some remarks about public safety as well. But until then, have a very safe and happy 4th of July. Thanks, everybody.